Hey friends, welcome back to Unpolished but Called. I'm Kathrin Shaffer. Today we're sitting with something that feels incredibly ordinary and yet deeply personal for so many of us. The experience of being tired and what it does to the way we see ourselves. Not just physically tired, but although that's real, I mean the kind of tired that shows up in your thoughts, the kind that makes everything feel just a little heavier, the kind that quietly asks, do I still have what it takes to keep showing up? I feel like that seems to be a running theme as of late, especially with my recent health scare. I definitely needed to do this episode. So thank you for being here. Because if we're honest, tiredness doesn't just slow us down, it messes with our perspective. It has a way of sneaking into how we interpret our lives, how we measure our worth, and sometimes even how we imagine God feels about us. And a lot of us have learned, without anyone explicitly saying it, that our value is tied to how much we can handle, how consistent we can be, how dependable we are, how much energy we bring into a room. So when our energy drops, we don't just feel exhausted, we start feeling like we're slipping somehow, like we're not quite the version of ourselves we're supposed to be. So today, we're not rushing past that feeling. We're not going to try to fix it with a quick inspirational line. We're going to sit with it. We're going to talk it through. And we're going to remind ourselves of something we need to hear again and again. We are loved even when we are tired. Not someday when we're rested, not when we catch up, not when we feel more motivated, right here in real life, in the middle of whatever season we are in. So let's take a breath together and ease into this conversation. There's a moment most of us recognize, even if we don't talk about it much. It's that moment when you realize you don't have the same emotional or mental energy you normally do. Maybe something small happens and your reaction feels bigger than it should. Maybe a decision that would normally be simple suddenly feels overwhelming. Maybe you find yourself withdrawing or procrastinating or just staring at your to-do list without the usual sense of momentum. And that's when the internal dialogue often kicks in. We start questioning ourselves. We wonder why we can't just push through. We compare this version of ourselves to a previous version that seemed more capable. And without even noticing, we start telling ourselves a story that sounds something like this. If we were stronger, we wouldn't feel this way. And that story is incredibly common. And it's also incredibly misleading. Because tiredness isn't a character flaw. It isn't proof that we've become lazy or unmotivated or spiritually off track. It's usually just a sign that we've been carrying something. Responsibilities, emotions, expectations, decisions. And our system is asking for a little space. But instead of listening, many of us instinctively judge ourselves. We interpret tiredness as failure instead of information. And once we label it as failure, it's very hard to respond with kindness. Part of why we do this is because of the environment we live in. Our culture rewards productivity. It celebrates people who seem endlessly capable. It praises those who can juggle 1,000 things and still show up smiling. And when we internalize that value system, we start believing that being on all the time is the goal. So when we're not on, we feel like we're doing life wrong. But here's the truth we don't hear often enough. Our capacity is not constant. It ebbs and flows. It changes with our health, our circumstances, our emotional load, our season of life. And that fluctuation doesn't make us unreliable humans. It makes us real ones. Think about it. We don't expect seasons in nature to look the same. We don't look at winter and say, wow, these trees are really failing at being trees. We understand that cycles are normal, that rest and dormancy are part of growth. And yet, when it comes to our own lives, we expect ourselves to operate like it's perpetual summer. And when we can't, we assume something is wrong with us. The reality is that tiredness often reveals how much we care. It shows up because we've been investing energy somewhere, in relationships, work, healing, decision making, and simply trying to navigate life well. It's not a sign that we're disengaged. It's often a sign that we've been deeply engaged for a long time. But tiredness has another effect too. It lowers the volume on our resilience and raises the volume on our insecurities. Things we could normally brush off start to feel personal. Doubts that would normally pass through start to linger. We can begin to question not just our energy levels, but our direction, our purpose, even our faith. And in those moments, what we believe about love matters more than we realize. If we believe love is conditional, that it's something we earn by being consistent, upbeat, helpful, and strong, then tiredness will always feel threatening. It will feel like we're losing our footing, like we're drifting out of favor, like we need to hurry up and get back to being the better version of ourselves. But if we begin to understand love as something steadier, something rooted in who God is rather than how we perform, then tiredness doesn't have the same power to define us. It becomes a state we move through, not a verdict we live under. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? We start asking, what do I need right now? Instead of pushing ourselves harder, we become curious. Instead of assuming we're failing, we recognize we're human. And that recognition opens the door to compassion. Not the fluffy kind, but the grounded kind that allows us to tell the truth about where we are without turning it into shame. Because shame loves tiredness. Shame takes a simple reality, like low energy, and turns it into a personal accusation. It tells us we're not disciplined enough, faithful enough, strong enough. It tells us everyone else is managing just fine and we're the exception. But comparison is rarely accurate, especially when we're exhausted. We don't see the full picture of other people's lives. We see what's visible, not what's heavy. And when we compare our internal state to someone else's external presentation, we almost always come out feeling like we're falling short. Learning to live loved while tired means stepping out of that comparison loop. It means remembering that our journey has its own pace, its own rhythm, its own seasons. It means trusting that faithfulness doesn't always look like high energy. Sometimes it looks like simply staying present in the middle of a hard day. Another thing tiredness tends to reveal is how much we rely on ourselves. When we feel strong, it's easy to believe we're holding everything together. We make plans, we execute them, we feel capable. But when our energy drops, we're reminded of something humbling and freeing at the same time. We are not self-sustaining. We were never meant to be. There's a quiet invitation in tiredness to loosen our grip, to admit we don't have endless reserves, to let ourselves be supported by God, by others, by grace. And while that can be and feel uncomfortable, it can also be deeply relieving because it shifts the pressure off our shoulders. We don't have to be the source of our own strength. We don't have to manufacture resilience out of thin air. We can receive. Receiving is not something many of us are good at. I know. We're good at giving, at helping, at showing up, but receiving care, rest, understanding, that can feel vulnerable. It can feel like admitting we can't do it all. But maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe the moments when we realize we can't do it all are the moments when we discover we were never meant to. And that realization doesn't diminish us. It humanizes us. It brings us back into alignment with reality, where we are allowed to have limits and still be deeply loved within them. Because love that only shows up when we're impressive isn't love, it's admiration. And admiration fades when performance dips. But love, real love, stays present even when we're at half capacity. So part of what we're learning here is to separate our identity from our energy levels. We are not our productivity. We are not our mood. We are not our ability to keep up with everything. Those things fluctuate. Our worth doesn't. And when we start living from that place, something softens. We stop fighting ourselves so much. We stop trying to outrun our own humanity. We begin to make space for honesty. Honesty about what we can carry, what we need, and where we are, not where we think we should be. And honesty is where real connection happens with God, with others, and even with ourselves. Because when we're honest, we're no longer pretending. And when we're no longer pretending, we're finally in a place where love can meet us in a way that feels real instead of theoretical. So, now we're going to move from honesty into practice. Because recognizing that we're tired is one thing. Living differently because of it is another. And that is where the conversation becomes less about ideas and more about posture. How we carry ourselves inside our real lives. When we accept that our energy has limits, we start paying attention in a new way. We notice what drains us, what restores us, what actually matters, and what only feels urgent because we're trained ourselves to respond to everything as if it's equally important. Tiredness, as uncomfortable as it can be, has a way of clarifying priorities. It strips away the illusion that we can do it all and forces us to choose. Choosing can feel scary at first. It feels like we're letting something drop. But often what we're actually doing is letting go of what was never ours to carry. in the first place. We begin to recognize that faithfulness isn't measured by how full our schedule is. It's measured by whether we're present where we are. And presence is different when we're tired. We don't bring the same speed or intensity, but we can still bring attention, care, and honesty. And there's something deeply grounding about allowing ourselves to show up as we are instead of waiting until we feel stronger. Because life doesn't pause until we feel perfect. Relationships don't pause. Growth doesn't pause. God doesn't wait at the finish line for the better version of us. He meets us in the middle of the day we actually have. One of the most freeing shifts we can make is learning to redefine strength. We often think strength looks like pushing through, holding everything together, never letting anyone see the cracks. But there's another kind of strength that looks quieter. It looks like acknowledging limits without shame, asking for support, resting when rest is needed, instead of proving something to ourselves or others. This kind of strength isn't dramatic, but it's sustainable. It allows us to keep going in a way that doesn't slowly empty us out. Because exhaustion doesn't usually come from one hard day. It comes from many days of ignoring what we need while trying to live up to expectations we never questioned. And when we begin to question those expectations, we often realize how many of them were never grounded in love. They were grounded in fear of disappointing people, falling behind, not being enough. Tiredness exposes those fears because it removes our ability to keep performing at the same level. And while that exposure can feel uncomfortable, it's also where healing begins. Because once we see the fear, we can stop letting it drive us. We can start making decisions from a different place, a place that's rooted in trust instead of pressure. Trust that God is not measuring us by how much we accomplish. Trust that our worth is steady even when our capacity isn't. Trust that we don't have to earn rest or justify needing space. Another shift that often happens as tired seasons is learning to receive kindness without immediately trying to repay it. Many of us are uncomfortable being on the receiving end. We like to be the helpers, the strong ones, the ones who show up. But when we're tired, we sometimes find ourselves needing care instead of giving it. And that can stir up all kinds of feelings: guilt, discomfort, vulnerability. But receiving is not weakness. It's part of being human. And when we allow others to care for us, we're not just getting help, we're allowing connection to deepen. We're letting love move in both directions instead of only one. That mutuality is where relationships become real instead of transactional. And in the same way, our relationship with God shifts when we stop relating to Him as if we're constantly trying to prove something. Instead of approaching Him with a mental checklist of what we should be doing, we begin to approach Him with honesty about where we are. Sometimes that looks like a long prayer, quiet moment of awareness, or simply acknowledging His presence in the middle of an ordinary task. Faith in tired seasons often looks simpler, but it isn't weaker. It's just less performative. It becomes less about intensity and more about connection. Less about trying to feel a certain way and more about trusting that we're held even when our emotions are flat. There's also something important about learning to speak to ourselves with the same gentleness we believe God has toward us. The way we narrate our own experience shapes how we move through it. If our internal voice is harsh, we'll carry tiredness like a failure. If our internal voice is compassionate, we'll carry it like a season. Compassion doesn't mean we stop growing. It means we stop shaming ourselves into growth. And growth that's rooted in compassion tends to last longer because it doesn't rely on pressure to keep going. It relies on understanding. As we practice this, we begin to notice small changes. We notice we're less reactive to our own bad days. We recover faster after moments of overwhelm. We're more patient with others because we're no longer holding ourselves to impossible standards. And slowly, almost quietly, we begin to live with more ease. Not because life got easier, but because we stopped fighting ourselves inside it. And that's really the heart of living loved while tired. It's not about eliminating exhaustion from our lives. That's not realistic. It's about refusing to let exhaustion define our worth. It's about remembering that our identity is deeper than our energy level. It's about letting love be the constant even when everything else fluctuates. Because the truth is, our lives will always have seasons of high energy and low energy, clarity and confusion, strength and vulnerability. That rhythm is part of being human. And if we can learn to trust that we are held through all of it, we stop fearing the dips so much. We stop panicking when we're not at our best. We start seeing those moments as invitations to lean in instead of proof that we're falling apart. And when we live that way, something shifts in how we move through the world. We become gentler, not just with ourselves, but with everyone around us. We recognize that most people we meet are carrying something invisible. We become less quick to judge, more willing to listen, more open to grace. Because we've experienced what it feels like to need it. Tiredness, in that sense, can become a teacher, not a pleasant one, but an honest one. It teaches us what matters, what doesn't, where we need support, and how deeply we're loved beyond our performance. And if we let it, it reshapes our understanding of strength, faith, and connection in ways that stay with us long after the season passes. So as we wrap up, let's hold on to one simple truth. Being tired does not move us outside of love. It doesn't disqualify us, make us less faithful or less valuable. It simply reminds us that we are human and that our lives are meant to be lived with grace, not constant pressure. If this conversation met you where you are, if it gave language to something you've been feeling, then I want to invite you to share this episode with someone who might need the same reminder. Word of mouth is one of the ways the space keeps growing, and it helps more people find encouragement right where they are. You'll also find links in the show notes for the website, the free Start Here guide, and ways to support the mission if you want to partner with what we're building long term. Every bit of support helps keep these conversations going and allows the space to keep reaching people who need it. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for showing up exactly as you are. We'll talk again soon.